There was an old village, hidden deep within a vast forest, known only to those who sought its peace. Eldergrove was a small, quiet place where the days passed in harmony with the rhythm of nature. The village's people lived simple lives, growing their own food, raising livestock, and celebrating the changing seasons in their small, thatched-roof homes. The trees of the forest were their constant companions, their silent guardians who watched over them from ancient times. But there was one person who stood apart from the rest of the villagers, an elderly woman named Vera. Her small cottage stood at the edge of the village, tucked beneath a towering oak tree, its roots twisted and gnarled like the hands of the earth itself. She was known by all, but few understood her. While the villagers lived in the present, Vera seemed to carry the weight of centuries in her eyes. Her weathered skin and silvery hair were markers of time past, but it was her wisdom, her deep knowledge of the world, that made her truly remarkable. Vera had lived longer than any of them could remember, and she was often regarded as a healer, a mystic, and a guardian of the village's ancient secrets. Despite her importance to the village, Vera was a solitary figure. She seldom left her home, except to collect herbs and roots from the forest or to offer guidance to those who sought her counsel. But the people of Eldergrove had always trusted her, and they loved her as a protector of their lives, a watchful eye who kept the village safe from harm. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the village settled into its peaceful evening rhythm, something unsettling happened. A strange breeze swept through the trees, carrying with it a chill that sent shivers down the villagers' spines. It wasn't the normal wind of the season, nor the gentle breeze that whispered through the leaves. No, this wind felt different. It felt like a warning. Vera, as always, was the first to feel it. She stood in the doorway of her cottage, her hands resting on the old wooden frame, and listened to the wind as it howled through the branches of the oak tree. The trees, which had always seemed so comforting, now appeared to be trembling, their leaves rustling as if speaking in hushed tones. The wind carried a faint scent, too, a stench of decay, as if something was dying deep within the forest. It was a smell Vera recognized all too well, one she had hoped she would never encounter again. A dark presence was stirring. Vera had lived through many seasons, and in all those years, she had heard the stories, the tales that had been passed down from the elders, whispers of a dark sorcerer who had once ruled the land with terror. His name was Roska, and he was known to have the power to bend the very earth to his will. His magic was dark, and his heart was cold. He had brought death to many villages before his downfall. The legend told that Roska had sought immortality and ultimate power, seeking to bind himself to the very life force of the land. He had traveled far, searching for the fabled Crystal of Eons, an artifact rumored to grant its wielder eternal life. But his greed and lust for power had driven him to madness. The people of the ancient lands had united to imprison him within the depths of the forest, sealing him away with powerful enchantments for years. Roska had been forgotten by the world, a shadow in the forest, his name reduced to nothing more than a whisper. But Vera knew that his curse had never truly been broken. There was always the possibility that the seal would weaken, and the sorcerer would be freed once again. And now, the wind told her that he was waking. The villagers had no idea of the danger that was approaching. They went about their daily lives, unaware that the curse they had forgotten was stirring in the depths of the forest. But Vera knew. She could feel the earth tremble beneath her feet, and she could sense the dark magic creeping through the trees. She gathered her things quickly, her herbs, her potions, her ancient texts, and set off for the village center. There was no time to waste. The village needed to be prepared, for soon the curse of Roska would be upon them, and only she could stop it. The sun had barely risen the next morning when Vera arrived at the village square. The villagers were already busy with their morning routines, unaware of the impending danger. She called for an assembly, and the people gathered in the square, their faces curious but apprehensive. "Listen to me," Vera said, her voice strong despite her age. "There is something in the forest, something dark and ancient. It has awoken. I have felt its presence." The villagers murmured among themselves, unsure of what to make of her words. To them, Vera's warnings had always been a part of her mysticism, the stories she told about the old magic and the creatures that once roamed the earth. But there was a steel in her voice now that none of them had ever heard before. "What do you mean, Vera?" Beldrick, the village blacksmith, asked. He was a strong man, tall and broad-shouldered, and his voice held an edge of skepticism. "The forest is full of life. Surely you can't mean any harm by this?" "I wish I could tell you that this is just another superstition," Vera replied, her gaze locking with Beldrick's. "But the wind does not lie. Something evil has been unleashed, and it is heading towards us." "What should we do?" a woman named Elira asked, her voice trembling. Vera stood tall, her eyes sweeping over the gathered crowd. "We must be ready. The sorcerer Roska is returning, and with him, the dark magic that could destroy us all. We need to prepare for what is coming. We must leave the village and take refuge in the sacred caves in the hills. There, we can withstand whatever he throws at us." The villagers began to argue. Some were afraid, others were unsure. Many did not believe Vera's warnings, but some of the older folk, those who had heard the stories of the dark sorcerer, knew better. The air was thick with doubt and fear, but Vera did not falter. She had seen this before. She knew what had to be done. "I know you are scared," she said softly, her voice filled with wisdom. "But we must stand together, or we will fall apart. If we do not act now, it will be too late." After a long, tense silence, the villagers began to nod, one by one. They knew Vera was right. They had to leave with heavy hearts and hurried steps. The villagers began to prepare for their departure. They gathered their belongings and made their way to the hills, where Vera knew there was a network of caves hidden from the sorcerer's eyes. The journey was long and treacherous, the path winding through the dense forest. As they walked, the fog began to thicken again, the air growing colder with each passing hour. Vera led the way, her old bones moving with surprising agility, her mind focused on the task at hand. The villagers followed, some carrying children, others with their arms laden with supplies. They moved quickly, but the shadow of dread that hung over them made it hard to keep their spirits high. By the time they reached the caves, night had fallen. The caves were dark, but they offered shelter. Vera had always known this place, had always considered it a sanctuary, a place where the old magic still lingered. The villagers settled inside the caves, exhausted and fearful. They lit small fires to ward off the cold and tried to rest. But Vera remained standing, her mind racing. She knew the sorcerer would come soon. She could feel his presence drawing closer with every passing moment. That night, as the villagers huddled together in the caves, the ground began to shake. The walls of the cave trembled, and a low rumble filled the air. It was as though the earth itself was protesting the return of Roska. Vera stood at the entrance of the cave, her hands gripping a staff she had crafted many years ago. She knew the battle was coming, and she had to be ready. The villagers looked to her for guidance, but Vera was no longer just their healer. She was their last hope. The air grew still, and a sudden silence fell over the land. It was the calm before the storm. From the darkness of the forest, a figure emerged, a tall, gaunt man whose eyes burned with unnatural light. His face was pale, his robes torn, as though he had risen from the very depths of the earth itself. "Vera," he said, his voice cold and mocking. "I see you've gathered your people. How noble! But it will not save them." The first signs of Roska's power were subtle, yet unmistakable. As the villagers huddled in the caves, hiding from the impending danger, the temperature inside the cave began to drop. Cold mist seeped from the cracks in the rock, and an eerie silence stretched into the night. Vera felt it in her bones. This was not just the return of a man, this was the return of a force so malevolent, so evil, that it threatened to swallow the entire world whole. The sorcerer, once trapped deep within the earth, had resurfaced, and with him, an ancient darkness that could never be quelled with mere weapons or fire. She could hear his laughter in the distance, mocking her. It wasn't the laughter of a man, it was a sound that reverberated through the very core of the land. It was a laugh that seemed to twist the air itself, contorting everything around it. The darkness he had once bound within himself was now his ally, feeding off the very fear and uncertainty of the villagers. The villagers huddled closer around the fire, terrified. Vera's presence was a comfort to them, but even she knew that mere hope would not be enough to save them. They needed something stronger, something powerful enough to defeat a sorcerer who had been cast out of time itself. Darius, a young man who had grown up hearing the old stories of magic and creatures, approached Vera. His face was pale, his voice trembling. "What do we do now? Can you stop him? Can you stop Roska?" Vera did not answer immediately. She gazed into the fire, her mind racing. She was old, yes, but she had seen things that others could never imagine. Her knowledge of the ancient arts, of the earth's hidden power, was vast. Still, Roska was a force of nature, and the challenge ahead would test her like never before. "I will do what I can," she said finally, her voice firm, but not without a hint of sorrow. "But you must trust in me, Darius. You must be strong for the others." The young man nodded, but his worry lingered in his eyes. He had seen Vera wield magic before, but he had never seen her face such a dire situation. The legend spoke of Roska's power, the ability to twist nature, to corrupt the very essence of life. If anyone could stop him, it would be Vera, but even she was not invincible. As the night wore on, a heavy fog descended upon the hills, swirling in an unnatural manner. It wasn't the typical fog the villagers were used to. This was darker, thicker, and almost alive. It crawled over the ground like a blanket of despair, smothering the village below and choking out the moonlight. Vera paced back and forth in the cave's narrow entrance. She had to find a way to stop Roska before he could unleash the full force of his wrath upon the land. The villagers couldn't stay hidden forever, and if they did, they would die without ever knowing what had come for them. Suddenly, the earth trembled beneath her feet. A rumble filled the air, and from the darkness, a figure emerged, Roska himself. His tall form moved with unnatural grace, his long cloak flowing behind him like a shadow. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, piercing the mist that surrounded him. His face was gaunt, and his skin appeared almost transparent, as though his very body had been ravaged by time itself. But the magic that emanated from him was undeniable, It was a power so ancient and dark that even the forest seemed to bend to his will. Vera stood her ground. She had prepared for this moment, but she knew the cost would be great. "I have waited so long for this," Roska's voice echoed, deep and cold. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The land is mine to claim, and you are nothing but a dying remnant of a forgotten time. Your power is built on lies, Roska," Vera said, her voice trembling with both defiance and sorrow. "The land does not belong to you. You may have bent it to your will once, but I will not allow you to destroy it again." Roska's laugh sent a chill through the cave. "You are foolish, old woman. You have no idea what you are up against. I am not just a man, I am a force. The land is mine, and I will shape it in my image." The earth began to shift, the very ground beneath their feet cracking and twisting as though it were alive. Roots shot from the soil, snaking through the cave's walls like serpents. The trees outside bent, their branches creaking as if in pain. Vera's eyes narrowed as she grasped her staff. She raised it high, calling upon the earth's power, the ancient magic that had been hidden for centuries. "The land may have suffered under your hand, but it will rise again." The power surged from her staff, sending a shockwave of energy through the cave. The roots of the trees around them began to wither, the once lush vegetation beginning to wither under her magic. The force of the spell was so great that the cave trembled, stones falling from the ceiling, but Roska was not intimidated. He raised his hands, and the very air around him twisted. His magic clashed against Vera's, creating a violent storm of energy. The ground split open, releasing a flood of dark, viscous smoke that poured into the cave, choking the air. The villagers inside the cave gasped in terror, but Vera did not flinch. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, but Roska was relentless. His power was overwhelming. He had fed on the dark energies of the forest for centuries, and now it was his to wield. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Vera's magic had held steady, but it was clear that the battle was draining her. She could feel the strength leaving her body, the weight of age and fatigue pressing against her. But she knew that she could not give up. The village depended on her. The land itself depended on her. She called upon the last of her strength, focusing on the deep, ancient magic that had been passed down through the generations. The trees of the forest had once been her allies, and now they answered her call. Roots shot from the earth, binding Roska's legs, holding him in place, but it wasn't enough. The sorcerer's power was too great. With a roar, he tore through the roots, his magic shattering them like glass. He advanced on Vera, his glowing eyes filled with malice. "Enough, old woman," he shouted, his voice a booming echo that reverberated through the forest. Vera's strength was failing, but she did not surrender. With one final cry, she summoned the full power of the earth, channeling all the magic she could muster into a single, desperate blast. The land trembled as a powerful wave of energy shot from her staff. The blast engulfed Roska, sending him crashing to the ground, his power dissipating in a burst of light and smoke. For a moment, there was silence. When the smoke cleared, Roska was gone. The village was safe, at least for now. The fog lifted, and the air grew warmer. The trees straightened, their branches no longer bent and twisted by his dark magic. The villagers, who had been watching from the caves, slowly emerged, eyes wide with disbelief. Vera stood at the entrance, her staff clutched in her hands, her face pale and weary. She had won, but at great cost. Of her strength was gone, her body fragile. The battle had taken everything from her. Darius approached, his eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "You did it, Vera! You saved us!" Vera smiled faintly, but her voice was soft. "The village is safe, for now. But remember this, evil never truly dies. It only waits. Guard the land, protect it, and never forget the price of peace."